All right. Hi, everybody. With this levity, we are going to have an important meeting today. And I'm going to be giving you some updates after we do the presentations of what your charge is going to be. And I want you all to give thoughtful attention to this charge, because when we meet again on the 22nd of March, there's going to be some really important decisions to be made at that time, because I need to know what your direction as a board is going to be. That's why I wanted to bring you all together with this, because we can't move forward without your direction. You'll be narrowing it down. There are critical deadlines that have to be met. So quick decisions are going to have to be made. Truly, very critical deadlines are going to have to be made. So, listen carefully. I was asked, are we putting one department against another? And indeed, that is not the case. And I don't want any of our departments feel that we're pitching one against the other. That is totally not. But we only can do one at a time, or none, depending on what the board feels. We need to allow the board to make a very thoughtful choice. And that's why I want to have all of you come to present what your needs are and what your future needs are, so that the board can really be thoughtful with their decision-making process. This is not a decision that I want to bring to the board to make that choice. That is not in my authority to do so. It is truly in the authority of the board to make that recommendation. So it'll be a good conversation to have. So with that, could you please call the roll?
Allen,
Allen present.
Bates,
Bates present.
Berman,
Berman here.
Brown,
Brown here.
Davis here.
Ford,
Ford present.
Froz,
Raz here.
Gums,
Gums here.
Iqbal,
Iqbal present.
Kenyon, Caius,
Caius present.
Kopi,
Opie's here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Lewis,
Martin present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Sanchez,
Sanchez present.
Shepro,
Shepro present. Kenyon's trying to dial in.
Silva, here, Strathman,
Strathman here.
Surges,
Serge is here.
Tepe,
Happy here.
Wallace, Woznicki.
Present. Somebody.
Pirog.
Here.
Kenyon here.
Well done. You're here. Very good. Thank you, Mike. Okay, we have.
Time got away from me.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. May we please have the pledge, Anita?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
Of the
States
United States of America
to the
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Judah.
There are no minutes to approve, and I don't believe that there is any public comment. I don't see any online. So we will go to the presentations. I would like to be able to, because of the time, unless there's a critical question regarding the presentation, if you can just jot down your questions and let the presenters present all of their information, and then we can go back. And please, this is the forum where I'd like to bring them all up and we can just have conversations about it, because this will be the last time you'll be able to hear from them. So in order, I think we're starting with mental health.
Good afternoon, everybody.
So it's difficult to fit in all the information that you have to go in a 10 or 15-minute presentation, but I would love for you to pay close attention to the cost of our doing nothing. We hope to provide you with even more details as far as budgetary costs, but I believe that the gains overall far outweigh any of the investment. And I will just share with you, because I sit in your chair, and I understand how difficult it is to bring out that nasty 3-letter word. I've had a history of not voting to increase the monies that we already receive from our public. But I was at a neighborhood meeting this weekend, and I asked, and I let them know, my good folks at Northeast Neighbors, what we're doing and why this is on the horizon. And I let them know how I felt about it, unsure, really, probably like you. And not one person even asked me how much it would cost them. Not one person came up to me to say, don't do it. I'd say about 4 or 5 people came up to me and said, if you have to do it, do it. All I want to know is where it's going and why and what you're doing with it. So that's what today is about. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Isaacson with the Health Department. I'm just going to go over a couple of slides just to quickly review what we talked about last time, just in case anybody missed it. The first thing I want to really talk about is just the scope of mental illness in the community. So as you remember, as I wait for the slide to change here, last time there was a video, we just showed some still shots from it, but in the presentation that was circulated to everyone, there was the young lady here who's a psychologist from London, I believe, who used rice as an example.
Microphone, go higher.
A little higher, there we go. Thank you. So she was talking about how at any given time, 20% of US adults may be suffering from a mental illness, and up to 5% of people may suffer from a serious mental illness that may really debilitate them and cause problems for them in their daily lives. She spread the rice in, and you could see if it's not yourself, it's probably a family member, a friend, someone you work with, that we know that mental illness is everywhere. We talked a little bit about some of the numbers. So just using the national averages, we can estimate that around 80,000 Kane County residents in any given year will be suffering with a mental illness or a substance use disorder, and around 20,000 residents may suffer from what we consider serious mental illness. I like to highlight this again. This is just a slide that shows with different populations who may be impacted. So we certainly have disparities that exist in our community that make it harder for people to access services, make it harder for them to access services that are close to them, that are in their language, et cetera. But I also like to bring this up to show that this impacts everybody. And you can see white adults is higher than the regular average. And in fact, we see in our community that some of our more affluent municipalities actually have the highest rates of suicide and the highest rates of substance use caused overdoses. So there's disparities. We need to be aware of that, but this is something that impacts every single community in Kane County. So again, a couple of review items. We did talk about our community health assessment process and how mental health was identified as the #1 health priority impacting Kane County residents. As a reminder, that the #3 issue was substance use disorders. Through our surveys, we did identify that 12% of residents said that they were struggling to access mental health services. Looking at national data, we see that about 1/4 of people suffering with a mental illness are having trouble accessing mental health services. And people who are struggling with mental illness, frequently many years, sometimes even more than a decade, may pass before they first get into care. So it's something that we want to do a better job getting people help sooner so that we can better improve their lives more quickly. We talked about a couple of terminal or critical things looking at overdoses, where we had over 90 people who lost their lives to overdose in 2020. As I mentioned, the 2021 data is still being tabulated by the coroner's office. They're finalizing some of those last cases now, and then we'll have that updated information. Through our emergency room surveillance, we see that we have over 400 overdoses in a given year. I mentioned that we're losing one resident every 8.5 days. So almost every week we're losing somebody to suicide. And we know that mental health is one of the leading causes of hospitalizations in the community. In fact, mental health conditions surpassed heart issues as the leading cause of hospitalization in Kane County many years ago. So next to labor and delivery, mental health issues are the primary reason why Kane County residents end up in the hospital. And then we also know that with criminal justice involvement, many times when the police are called, it's to deal with somebody who may be in crisis with a mental health issue. So those are two additional costs that we're looking at. I also mentioned how COVID made things much worse. There's a lot of national studies out there. I did add a quote. We did just have our Youth Voices Forum where we had high schools from around Kane County and high school students who participated to talk about what they're seeing with mental health. And you can see one student said, mental health is an issue that does exist. I can't brush it off and wish it away. So this is something that so many of our young people are struggling with. The remote learning, being away from their friends, being isolated from family has been something that's just exacerbated this issue. And I want to talk about how we measure costs. And as Dr. Silva said, when we look at behavioral health, it's different than say buildings or transportation and things like that, where it's a fixed cost. And I promise I'm not trying to be melodramatic, and I have the literature and can share different things with you all to look at different types of costs. But things for us to keep in mind: what is the cost of doing nothing? So certainly, as we've already talked about, we're losing residents. So whether that's through an overdose, whether that's through a suicide, whether that's potentially through violence, we are losing people. By not getting people into care, or for people who need help, but maybe on a 6 or an 8 month waiting list, that's creating tremendous suffering for our residents. And that's not only suffering for people who are struggling with a mental illness, especially somebody who maybe is just starting to have symptoms. And so they're really frightened, really don't know what's going on. But also that next bullet point, their family members are trying to figure what's going on. And if you've ever been in a situation or have somebody you care about who's been in a situation, trying to decide whether or not to call 911 for a family member because you're not sure of their behavior, if they're safe to themselves, if they're safe to people around you, that's a scary thing. And hospitalization can be a very traumatic thing for people. So that's a tough decision for a lot of families. And there's some estimates out there nationally that someone who has a family member with a serious mental illness spends up to 30 hours a week providing care to that person. So, and I know from my involvement in the National Alliance for Mental Illness over the years, I see parents in their 70s, in their 80s, who are taking care of adults, and they don't know where that person's going to get the care. And they know they're nearing the end of their life, trying to figure out, okay, here in Illinois, what happens when I die? Who's going to take care of my 50-year-old child who needs help? Also, homelessness. We know that mental illness and substance use disorders are one of the key drivers for homelessness in our community. Unneeded hospitalizations, sometimes going to the hospital and doing an inpatient stay is the exact right thing for somebody, but it can be a traumatic experience for people. And because we're not taking care of things on the front end, and because we're not doing prevention, this is not only traumatic, but it's also a very expensive way to provide care to our residents if they end up having a hospital stay. And when you look at the thousands of dollars that are spent on hospitalizations, where there's not a surgery being done, there's not a procedure being done, we're housing someone and providing care in that acute situation. If that can be avoided, and I work very closely with the hospitals, and we're fortunate to have the resources we do in our community, but if that can be avoided, that's much better. Also, incarceration and court involvement. Over 40% of people in our jails are suffering from mental illness. That's likely what brought them in. So that's something that we can look at. lost productivity at work is something that there's various studies out there nationally that attribute dollar amounts to this, whether you're talking about anxiety, depression, whether you're talking about kind of the churn, especially right now in the Great Resignation, where more and more people are leaving their jobs. If somebody is not quite stable with their mental health and doesn't have the supports they need, they're more likely to leave their job, which means that's more expensive for all of our community employers to be able to manage that. And then finally, if it's a young person, certainly we see more school challenges that they may deal with. So there are a lot of different studies with different figures around each of these items that I can share if anybody's interested. But just to kind of lay out, as Dr. Silva said, what's the cost of doing nothing? We'll have a lot of these things that we're going to have to continue to deal with. So looking at specific opportunities and with the understanding that if this moves forward with mental health, that it would create a committee who would help identify where the funding would go. As Dr. Silva said, I kept the funding up a level, and so that there's options for people to choose from, but presenting to you now what our providers and what our residents have expressed to us through surveys, through interviews, et cetera. These are the areas that we see the most need for improvement. So I just took the top two here to talk about. Number one, workforce. That's the key issue. We're in crisis in a lot of sectors in our country right now with workforce, with the Great Resignation, but behavioral health, especially in Illinois, is one that's been getting worse and worse and worse even before COVID. So looking at opportunities to continue partnering with our community colleges and universities, building scholarship programs and paid internships so that we can get people and retain them, so that we can have programs where if they sign on to be a part of the mental health safety net in our community, that they'll stay there for years and that they won't automatically bounce to a higher paying job, either in another community or at another organization, so that we continue to have gaps in service. Looking at community training, and there's a lot of great evidence-based models, and I can provide details on all of these if you want, but how can we better train and support people in our schools? And I say and support because that's a critical piece of this. It's not just providing somebody with a 2-hour training around, say, trauma-informed care. It's providing that training, but then having the policies and having the resources around people so that they can actually implement the things that we train them to do. I know there's other discussions with public safety, but there has to continue to be a strong connection with any of our mental health and substance use work, with the sheriff's office, with the state's attorney's office, and with the courts. And then certainly for our behavioral health providers, making sure that we have people who are equipped to deal with the things that they're facing. We just surveyed our providers a couple of weeks ago, and the number one thing that came back was dealing with trauma and how they can do a better job of that. And also, as I've mentioned in the past, we have younger and younger people. That's an area where people see a greater need to be able to participate.
Thank you, Michael. Just a quick interruption. And as Madam Chair said initially, we are not here to pin one department against another, but what I would love for all of us to realize is that assessing the needs of mental health of our community will lower the burden on public safety, because that will allow us to take a look at the individuals who need mental health resources and only leave us with, if done properly, then leave us with the folks who would fall under the public safety endangerment category. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you. And I say all the time in public meetings, I feel very fortunate working with Sheriff Hain and State's Attorney Moss. They're being very proactive on all of these things. So definitely we continue to work together. Improving recruiting and retention.
Shepro,
Yes, yes, sir.
may I add to that on behalf of the first responders? There are studies that indicate that up to a third of all initial contacts with either fire or police first responders are mental health related.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. And I'll kind of continue on that point. We're seeing far too many suicides in our first responder population. So not only can we do more to support and train them so that they can respond to calls better, but we also need to do more as a community so that we can support our first responders to get them the help they need. Getting skilled people in all of these organizations is another piece. And again, I've got high level things here. There's evidence-based interventions around each of these that we can drill into. As Dr. Silva said, in a 10-minute presentation, I'm keeping it pretty high level, but if there's areas of interest, and if we go to the 6-person committee to make decisions, I wanted to leave flexibility there. The second area is really looking at unfunded needs. And that's two things. It's unfunded needs for our community members, but it's also unfunded things for our providers. Frequently, things that are very effective aren't reimbursed by Medicaid, aren't reimbursed by insurance. So when I talk about how can we get out there and find people sooner who may need help, this means paying people to go and spend time in the library so that as people come in, there's a place where they can stop and check in, working with the park districts, working with police departments to get more social workers in our police departments so that we can touch people sooner and get them into the help they need. Also looking at what the residents need. So additional crisis stabilization. We don't need to send people to jail, and we don't need to have them in the emergency department. We could have a crisis stabilization unit where people come in, they're able to get some assistance from somebody, they're able to calm down so that they're not in that acute crisis situation. And not only is it much less expensive, but it's much better for that person in terms of suffering and trauma. And then looking at a trauma-informed response just across all sectors and how we can look at different needs that people have. So again, wanted to keep this relatively high level. It's different than the fixed costs and the gap that we may see with some of the other things that we're discussing, but I think the cost of doing nothing we've seen over the years, and this is an issue that continues to be worse. So with that, I'm happy to open for any questions.
Question, Shepro?
Mr. Foz and then Mr. Shepro.
Mike, on that last slide, the way I read it, it's not an either or. You would be proposing both those actions?
Absolutely. And even within these, there's a lot of options. So really, and this is not necessarily a good thing, Mr. Frost, but we're starting with nothing. So this would be, how is Kane County building up to be able to?
It's hard to, it's always awkward to talk about dollars and lives. It's just no right way of doing it. But like, do you know roughly offhand what our health department budget is right now?
About 7 million. It's a little different with COVID funding.
Yeah.
So this is significant. Absolutely.
I guess I was just sort of astounded at the numbers, but willing to look at anything.
Oh, Mr.
Shepro?
Shepro, my apologies, Mr. Shepro.
Well, a couple of questions, Michael. First, I think you made this clear, but these are all new programs that we are not currently spending money on them because we don't have the programs. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Now, and while the health department budget, a good deal of that is grant related to specific items. Right? So I don't know if it's actually a valid comparison to look at as a percentage of budget, because I think a lot of your budget is based on the ability to get grant money to do those services. Is that?
That is accurate. Yes, sir.
And then I guess for these particular items that you've highlighted, are there grant funds available? I assume not in the amount of, $9 million. What are the other available resources that would exist to implement these programs? And how much of these are either you do the whole thing or you're not really making an impact?
That's an excellent question. So everything I've talked about here is high level and is scalable. So the more resources we have, the more people we can reach, the more we can get interventions into people. We do have grant funding that we've been able to build up just over the last 3 or 4 years at the health department, where we have an early childhood mental health consultant. We've just received additional grant funding where we're going to hire 2 more to go in and work with childcare centers. We do have a multi-million-dollar children's mental health initiative where we're able to start doing some of that work. And we do have a new grant that we just wrote for the Illinois Department of Public Health that's giving us the ability to do some more things around opioids specifically. So 2 parts of your question, I think, are it's scalable. So it's not all or none. And the second thing is we can continue to piecemeal and pull in outside resources, but that's not a comprehensive response for us as a community. It's more siloed and it is piecemeal, unfortunately.
I have one last question. Dr. Silva and you both talked about the cost of doing nothing. Are there any numbers about, what that number might be? I mean, for example, hospitalizations due to not having alternative treatments available. I know that number is probably very hard to come by, but I wondered if there's anything that suggests what it might be. I know there have been that for incarcerations. What is the cost of incarceration versus other programs? And I wondered if there was something like this for something like mental health.
I happen to know the answer to the cost of incarceration. It's $33,000 per year per individual.
Right. But I guess my point simply is we talked about the cost of doing nothing here. Yes, I mean, so if you're talking about spending $33,000 to put someone in jail that could otherwise be getting treatment, I guess would be an example of that's a cost of doing nothing to solve the mental health problem. And I just want to make another plug. The fire departments and the fire districts weren't really eligible for a lot of the funding that we've gotten recently. And yet they have, as Michael suggests, a very substantial need, not only for the people they encounter, but for the people themselves who, I don't know that in my district we've had any suicides, but we've had people who can't take it anymore. So I do think that that's an important component of the presentation, and thank you for listening.
Mr. Shepro. Case, please.
Hold on a second. I've just moved from the sun, please.
Thank you. Mr. Shepro, I really like the way you think, and I think that's a very astute question. Obviously, we would have some informal numbers by talking to our department heads, and that would shed light and give I believe, a very substantial number. But I like the fact that you're painting a very clear picture, and definitely Michael and I can make some phone calls and give you an informal number, which again, I believe will be large. One question for you, Michael. Do you feel that there is a substantial amount of grant money out there that would provide matching funds? Meaning, if we invest, what have you, $1,000, that there are matching grants from the federal government that would double our investment?
Yes, I do think that. I believe that this is an investment, absolutely. And I can just tell you our experience with the Children's Mental Health Initiative that we have. That's private foundation funding. It's a 7-year grant that we were able to competitively get to bring those funds into Kane County. Because we had those funds, I was approached by another funder who now is giving us over $160,000 every year. That's what I was referencing with the early childhood. They said, we see what you're doing over there, and we want to be able to contribute to that good work. So in terms of just straight matching, absolutely. But I think as we build this, it's not only going to help the county, but also it'll help other providers to be able to be more competitive when they're writing for grants as well. And to Mr. Shepro's comment, we do have numbers on the cost of all of these things. So again, we have avoiding incarceration, workforce, you name it. It's pages and pages and pages. So if there's any specific areas that anyone would like to see data on, in some cases it's national averages and projections, and in other cases we have more localized data, but we absolutely can provide that information.
And perhaps we've got a number of questions, and I want to be, again, sensitive to everybody's time so that everyone has a full opportunity to present. If we can, Mo Iqbal is next, and then I know Mr. Leonard would like to speak as well. If you have that data, could you please send it to Jane, and that she will share it with the entire board?
Maybe a summary.
Yeah, just a local summary. We don't need
Local
to see
summary.
national
Very
data.
good. Okay.
We're just talking about how we can help our residents of Kane County.
Madam Chair, should I go ahead?
Yes, please, Mr. Iqbal.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the children. I think the speaker mentioned that we have to take care of the children, but doesn't the school board have to take care of it? I mean, that's their job. Why should we?
I think that's an excellent question, sir. And this is something where, and again, I'm a public health person. It's really looking at the whole system. I also could make the argument that it's not fair to take a child who may be living in a violent home and not have enough to eat, and that 5-year-old shows up at school and punches another kid. Of course they did. It would be foolish for us to expect them to behave any differently. Yet the school doesn't have the capacity by themselves to remedy that. They're not the parent. And so I think your question is very good in terms of whose responsibility is this. And what I propose is we all have to work together in this. So this is us working with police departments, working with schools. But I don't believe the responsibility can fall on any one, especially public agency.
And Mr. Iqbal, Commissioner Iqbal, I guess I would add to that as well, because it is a very good question. I believe that it is their job to educate children. So arithmetic, science, they are here, and I believe that many teachers have gone into that career because they want to prepare children for the future and educate them. Many of them did not go into that field to provide mental health intervention, I feel.
Nor do they have the training for that. I mean, the real training. Two more questions and then we can table this until later on. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, one statement and then one quick question. With respect to the suggestion Madam Chair had about a one-page summary, if you could do a one-page summary for us, give us the cost for incarceration, give us the cost for hospitalization, so that everybody on the board gets a copy of that, I think that would be ideal. My question is, of the $16 million that you're proposing for these programs, which are much needed, and we really appreciate you presenting those to us, what is the actual cost of staffing for these programs? Of the 16 million, how much would be actual staffing or salary and payrolls?
Yeah, fantastic question. To your first point, I'll put together a one-page summary, but as I alluded to, the dollar cost is a little trickier in some cases. So just to be aware, I can use some estimations to say, here's what it costs to hospitalize someone. But for a child who's missing school because of their mental illness, or somebody who switches jobs, that's why I didn't just simply share that information, but I'll definitely provide more. And then to the question about staffing, I think we have a lot of options here. So because there may be this committee that's formed to actually make the funding decisions with this, I didn't want to push like, here's this program and this specific intervention. So I think there could be things. I'm just speaking selfishly, I'm an advocate for building up the health department resources to be able to do some of this, but we certainly could look at contracting out. We can look at, as I mentioned to Commissioner Iqbal's question, partnering with other organizations to actually get funding to fire departments, police departments, courts, et cetera. I think that has to be part of the initiative. So not trying to avoid your question, I could say here for this specific program, focused on suicide prevention, it would be 3 staff with this type of training, and it would cost this amount for each person. But I'd like a little more input from the board and the actual funding decisions, because there's a lot of options right now.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, it's so high level, but
It's all right, thank you.
Bates, please.
No, Mavis, I'm going to table your question until the end because we're going to be moving on, but I think Mr. Brown had his hand up. And then we'll get back to you later on, if I may.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brown speaking. Michael, maybe I shouldn't be digging so far into the weeds right now, but you mentioned the amount of people that are incarcerated is around 40% of the jail population. So I'm wondering a couple things. How is that number determined? And is it been on a steady increase or kind of holding steady at 40%, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, so the 40% number is a national average. I believe here in King County, I believe Sheriff Hain has even reported that it's a higher number. When people come in, when they're first being processed, there is actually a screening that's done where we're able to identify some of those things. And again, I think this is an area where the sheriff has been incredibly proactive, looking at how we're getting treatment to people if they have a substance use disorder, et cetera. But it is increasing. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. And again, we'll have plenty of time, hopefully, for questions after this. So Mavis, make sure you write it down and
Okay,
we'll
thank
circle
you.
back around. Transportation.
Good afternoon, Tom Rickert with the Division of Transportation. This is pretty much the same PowerPoint that I had at the previous Committee of the Whole. There's about 2 slides that I added just for additional information. I'm going to skip over the first couple slides. It just goes into the tax as well as some of the rules that are associated with it. The third slide talks about the requirements associated with our long-range planning efforts, which we which we do have in place. And then the second paragraph there talks about the transportation purposes and essentially any purpose or anything that we do currently, this additional funding could be utilized. Our mission and goals, I hit this last time, but our primary focus is on the safety of the system as well as the personal mobility. And we have in place, we have our long-range transportation plan as well as a bicycle pedestrian plan as well as our long-range transit plan. We do a lot of cooperative planning efforts. We work directly, about 90% of all development is municipal. And we work directly with the municipalities on a lot of different development activities and do a lot of cooperative planning, not only with municipalities, but also with the county planning staff. We work on the quality of environment, and we also look at the system efficiency and try to keep up with some of the intelligent transportation system applications that are out there. Our planning efforts are based upon addressing demographic changes. Those changes are put together by Chicago Metropolitan Area Agency for Planning. And so CMAP does give us all the population and household data, and then we utilize that in modeling efforts so we can see exactly what the impacts are. When I was here last time, I talked about how the first time I came to Kane County. When I came to Kane County, the population was under 300,000, and now the population is probably around the 530,000 range. So it's grown significantly, almost 250,000 population. And by the year 2050, it's anticipated that it will grow by another 250,000. So 250,000 additional people, as well as about 116,000 additional households that will be in the county. So you see some on the graph there, you see some of that growth, 51% growth in population, 64% in households. What this translates to is transportation needs. Since I've been here, I've seen portions of Orchard Road actually constructed that didn't exist prior. I've seen Randall Road go from a 2-lane to a 4-lane. So there's been a lot of different improvements that have gone in because of those transportation needs. And without those highway transit and bike ped improvements, our system performance on our highway system will decline significantly by the year 2050. You can see some of the percentages there. There's 75% of our lane miles would be congested by the time 2050 is reached. The 2 maps on the right, you can see the congestion map for 2003. Primarily, you were looking at like Farnsworth Avenue and portions of Randall Road that were congested. The whole eastern 2/3 of the county will have different aspects of congestion by the year 2050 because of the growth projections. Moving on to the transportation plan. The transportation plan was adopted by the county board on May 11th of 2021. The various travel demand and implementation aspects are within that plan, and because of the limited revenue sources, our primary focus is on maintenance, and so we list that as well as safety improvements. And then as we're able to, when we have funding, we'll do continued enhancements as far as capacity on Randall, Fabian, Kirk, and Orchard Roads, and then various intersections and capacity improvements countywide. There's a number of intersections that we'll have to have either safety improvements put in or signals someday in the future. And so that funding is taken into account, the consideration of the costs. In the long-range plan, this process was a 3-year process. We had over 3,400 public comments that came in over our public comment period. The plan ultimately ended up being $1.023 billion estimate. That might sound like a gigantic number, and it is a gigantic number, but I can share with you in the years that I've served the county that we've spent way over that amount. We continue to figure out ways to find funding and address the county highway system, as well as we work with municipalities to address their needs as well. So it's a significant amount. The state amount is almost identical, but that's not what we're here to talk about. But I just wanted to let you know that the transportation aspects there's a lot of needs out there. In the Kane County's 2012 bicycle pedestrian plan, we didn't really get into the particular needs, but I know many of you approach me quite regularly saying that we need additional sidewalks, we need additional bike trails along our system. Currently, the funding that we have does not accommodate for those types of improvements. We try to, as best we can, when we do a significant capital improvement like the widening of Randall Road or Orchard, we try to do our best to accommodate the multimodal aspect of the corridor. And then in transit planning, our focus has been primarily with enhancing riding cane, and so that's been our focus. We also are working very closely with our municipal partners in order to develop transit corridors. Transit is very expensive, and you need basically the density in order for it to pay for itself. And so we've been working with municipalities to do apartments and condos along the Randall Road corridor and trying to make sure that the Randall Road corridor in the future can actually operate as a transit corridor. When we talk about transportation projects, I think it's very important that you recognize, this is one of the new slides, that it takes time to actually develop a project. Quite often I have a member from the public that might come to me and say, well, we need this done this year. And generally, unless it's maintenance, it takes way over a year. You can see on this chart that general maintenance is 1 to 3 years. If there's a bridge involved, you're looking at a minimum of 5 years and sometimes more, because we actually have to put in the capacity for the stormwater or for the creek underneath the roadway. And then new construction is 10 plus years for a project. And I listed on the bottom there the various phases. You start out with planning. You in planning aspect, you do some environmental aspects analysis of it. In phase 1 engineering is usually 2 to 3 years, and that includes also environmental analysis. And then you get into the phase 2 engineering, and that takes generally a year or 2 for the phase 2 engineering. And then land acquisition, you're generally at a minimum, you're looking at 2 or 3 years just to acquire the land for the project. And then you have construction, and all of that equals 10 plus years. And so I just wanted to kind of let you know that we we basically do a 5-year financial plan, which is required by law. So every year the county board has an opportunity to see what we're doing, and from the engineering level all the way through construction. And then for the 2050 long-range transportation plan, there's a lot of different projects. That map on the right, that map shows quite a few capacity needs that will be needed along Kirk Road and Fabian and Randall Road, including some of the state routes, Orchard Road, and there's some east-west routes. Big Timber is going to be a pretty significant corridor in the future for traffic volume that will need to be addressed. And there's other roadways that are going to be similar. Kesslinger Road is going to have some growth that needs to be addressed. So you can see the list on the left. There's 3 interchanges that are currently being looked at that will need capacity improvements. Randall at I-90, Randall at US 20, and Orchard at I-88. There's also a number of corridors and intersection improvements, including signals and bike ped components. And again, most of this is focused on like Randall Road, Orchard, Kirk, Fabian, Big Timber, Plank Road, and Main Street roads, and Kesslinger are also some of the east-west roads that are going to need various improvements over time. And then multimodal, again, a key aspect. We're trying to continue to look at enhancements and addressing the required federal ADA changes that need to be occurring on our system, as well as bicycle pedestrian improvements. And then we also have various transit efforts that are underway. We've started to connect sidewalks. We've put in pace bus shelters along Randall Road. We worked with the city of Aurora on some of their transit connections. A lot of coordination with the municipalities as well as with PACE and Metro on different transit projects. The funding needs, again, they're all within the plan. That you can actually pull out a list of the projects, the project costs. They're all available in the long range transportation plan. It equates to a little over $1 billion. The county also has our 5-year transportation improvement program. We are required again to do both of these long range as well as 5-year financial plan by law. And so it shows currently our 5-year financial plan shows $201 million worth of improvements, projects that are currently underway that are fiscally constrained. So these projects will occur. And then it also shows about 190 million capital shortfall for the projects that are currently also under development in engineering or land act, where we don't really have yet the construction funds in order to build those projects. So it's about 50% of the projects that we're currently working on, a little more than 50% are funded at this time. In total, there's 822 million in capital funding that's needed by FY 2050 to address ongoing and adopted projects by the county board at this time. And that includes a 2% annual inflation. Just look at our revenues and our expenditures. I tried to show you this is a typical budget if we didn't have carryover funds from year to year. So a typical budget for us would be about $45.6 million in revenues, and you can see all the various types of revenues there. And then expenditures are our typical budget, and this is for FY 2021 dollars. Our typical budget is also matched to 45.6, and we have maybe about anywhere from $7 to $9 million annually available for capital improvements. That $7 to $9 million might sound like a lot, but your typical intersection cost is anywhere from about $4 to $6 million. So it essentially allows us to do a couple intersections a year. So we do spend a lot of time going after federal and state dollars to also assist us with building our program. The primary expenditures, those are things I think you're all hopefully well aware of: pavement maintenance, personnel, traffic signals, maintenance and operations, ice control, vehicles and equipment, bridge inspections, repair and replacement, ADA improvements, and ride and cane. Looking at the benefit potentially of a 0.25% sales tax for transportation. If we look at the 13 million annually, and we look at the expected revenue over 27 years with the potential growth over time as well. We're estimating around $481 million that would come from that over the 27 years out to 2050. At about $9 million current capital spending until 2050, we have around $225 million. And then on average, we probably, except for our large projects where we get like a federal earmark, which only occurs maybe once every 7 to 8 years, we probably, other than those types of earmarks, we probably average around $2 million a year in federal and state funding. And so about 50 million. So this gets us really close to the 822 million. And so it would be a benefit in order to address the needs of the county. And then other funding considerations and needs. This is a new slide. Personnel. I think that in discussions over the past year with our maintenance section, we are looking at trying to up our maintenance personnel positions. So we're looking at 1 or 2 additional maintenance staff to address the additional lane miles, as well as the bike ped and transit improvements that we have responsibilities for. And then for retention of specialized and professional staff, we're having a very hard time retaining engineers and planners. And so I kind of, when I hire a planner, I almost automatically know within 2 years I'll be replacing that planner because they're taking a job someplace else for an additional $20,000, $30,000 more a year. So I know with engineers, I used to be able to hire engineers directly out of college for $45,000 to $50,000 a year. I can't even hire anybody out of college now unless I'm willing to do $80,000 a year. There's just such a need, and with the various projects that are going on in the state, they're just immediately grabbed up, and they're offering to reimburse all college tuition loans, and so it's very competitive right now for engineers. And then increasing maintenance costs by bituminous pavement. This fluctuates with oil prices. Just since last year, the pavement index is up about 34% since last January to this January, and it's probably going to go up more. So 34% over the past year, and it's probably going to be more than that over the next year. So it's pretty significant. It used to be when I first started working for the county, we were paying about $25 a ton for bituminous, and I've seen it right now. It's probably around 80 or so, but I've seen it even up over $100 a ton. So it fluctuates greatly, and it is. I'm anticipating over the next year that our resurfacing costs. I showed 8.8 million for pavement. We're probably looking at an additional over $2 million just in resurfacing costs annually. At current numbers, they are going up, like I said. So, and then trucks, scarcity in trucks. It's very hard to find trucks, and they're becoming more expensive. And then capital and consideration of other costs. There's county participation with IDOT, complete streets, technology costs. And then I'm mentioning over again the 190 million of current unfunded projects that we are doing engineering on right now. And sustained value for the King County residents, safety, an opportunity, improve daily lives for residents, improve business climate, as well as I should have mentioned job creation. There's significant costs or there's significant job creation that comes along for the projects that are created. And then alternative modes of transportation. We really are trying to get more heavily involved in addressing those needs, fewer traffic bottlenecks, and improved traffic flow and signal synchronizations. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Yes, Anita.
So I have a real quick question. So I heard from somebody Monday that a lot of our small bridges are in really, really poor repair, the ones on our little county roads that our buses go over. Is that true? I guess the bottom line.
What did you say, that they're in disrepair? or that-
That we have a lot of problems with our smaller bridges, that they are needing repairs.
Well, we try to have a metric out there that's available to the public. We're actually in pretty good shape. I would say that it's one of the things that we, on a regular basis annually, that we evaluate. And so we're not only evaluating the county structures that are out there, but we're also evaluating the township structures that are out there.
If I shoot you an email, will you tell me where that is? Just so I can respond to this person.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It does take time, as I mentioned on that one slide. So as a bridge does not meet the sufficiency levels, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unsafe. All of our bridges are safe. I mean, we're working diligently to make sure that the minute certain sufficiency aspects are reached, that we're able to head into design elements, planning and such, so that we do not have concerns out there. Now, and if there are concerns, we know almost immediately, and we start posting the bridges for weight restrictions. But if you drive around, you won't find very many bridges that are posted.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Brown speaking. Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, would it also be fair to say that there's a concern as we go to more electric vehicles, that the motor fuel tax that you're going to get is going to be smaller as well?
Yes, yeah, we're already seeing some reductions in the motor fuel tax. It's something that we do anticipate that there will have to be a different methodology that's considered at the state and federal level to address those types of issues.
But currently there's not.
Currently, we're able to do what we need to do when it comes to maintenance of our system.
Yeah, but I mean, currently there's no other methodology being proposed by the state legislator to make up for this.
Currently not. There's the state as well as CMAP is looking into it. Vehicle miles traveled. There's a couple states in the country that are doing pilot programs, and so ultimately, no one's really come up with a different approach other than vehicle miles traveled. And so that might be the only way that it can be approached, unless somebody comes up with another new idea.
Yes. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tom, I have a question for you. Can you hear me better now? Tom, I have a question for you, and maybe I misunderstood it. When you were showing the primary expenses of about 45 million a year that you budget for, there were funds in your department that handled that 45 million a year, I take it. On the very next slide, I think you showed a 9 million for capital projects. Is that in addition to the 9 million you're budgeting on your annual basis, or?
No, that is the 9 million that I'm carrying over. The available for capital projects shows at 9 million. It's probably more like 7 to 9 million in actuality. And then, yeah, in the next slide, that 9 million is accounted for in that third bullet point. And so it's the same 9 million.
Oh, same, okay.
Yep.
I didn't know if it was in addition or what the, so you do have that 9 million or 7 to 9 million budgeted every year in revenues, but if we could get additional monies to you through the sales tax,
Yeah.
that would lessen that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
The
Several
primary
question?
We're in a moment, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say the primary concern is that 9 million. We generally, the intersection example was the one that I brought up. Generally an intersection is 3 to 5 million. We had one intersection that was $24 million because, and that was Randall and Route 64. I mean, so they can vary a lot. And we had to save up a lot of money to be able to do that intersection, as well as go after state and federal funds for it.
No, and I think the 9 million that you're showing as budgeted for capital is probably low. As you say, if you don't get the full 9 million, and then with inflation and all the other costs rising, you know, that could very easily in 5 years, instead of being 9 million, could be 14 million. So that's why I thought maybe you were showing an additional 9, because you're probably going to need it, Tom.
And the reduction of the motor fuel tax
Yes, yeah.
in the short term, depending on what's going to be happening. Mr. Shepherd, was that you?
It was me, but I think that Mr. Leonard and Mr. Rickards' exchange answered my question.
Very good. I just have one comment. I was just informed by our public information office that in regards to the bike paths, that there was a posting on our Facebook page about bike paths, and with great thrill, there were 10,000 hits on a new bike path that's coming through. So for bike paths, multimodal forms of transportation seems to be very, very important for Kane County residents. The next one, which only received 3,500, I think, hits, was Blair's dog, the Seeing Eye Dog. That was the largest one until it was posted about the bike paths. So 3 times as much.
Yeah, as far as the bike paths, I think all of our projects are looked at with, you know, some kind of aspect of walking and biking, and there are actually grant and funding opportunities related specifically to those that we try and take advantage of. But no, I was just going to mention that, you know, the 800, this is Frost speaking, by the way, $822 million, you know, big scary number. We'd hope to leave the meeting today with a check, but I guess we probably won't be. We won't be doing that. Yeah.
You can get a check, it just might not.
I think the treasurer's office closed at 4:30.
But they, you know, keep in mind that is over 28 years. And as Mr. Leonard said, you know, 9 million a year on capital projects. But if you just look recent big projects like Stearns and Longmeadow, Anderson Road, you add up 4 or 5 of these, it's 300 million right there. And those are all recent memories. So it's not unattainable. So it's realistic. So thank you.
Shepro, I do have a question now.
Yes, Mr. Shepherd, and you'll be the last one.
Thank you.
Until later.
The 822 million, is that the estimated current cost or the forecasted cost, you know, through 2050?
That is the forecasted cost. It does include a 2% inflation aspect to it.
Which is modest.
Well, yeah, well, I guess say right now that doesn't seem too realistic, but I would guess that any forecast for 28 years in the future is problematic at best. And if you have a crystal ball, maybe you could help me with my stock market investments. But it just seems to me that I think I saw maybe a long time ago, there, you had a map that shows the anticipated traffic loads in the future as well. And as I seem to remember, they overwhelm our ability to keep up with the track. Yeah, that's the slide. Yeah, those are all like level of service F, I think, or something on the dark red lines.
Well, I do have a congestion map that is part of the presentation where the level of F is the red roads, the congested roads on the 2050 map. And you can see the big difference between 2003 to 2050 for that level of congestion. And then on the map here, this map actually shows the what I would refer to the annual traffic, or not the annual, sorry, the daily traffic on each one of those roads. So when you look at those roads, the red roads will have an additional 20,000 cars a day plus on the red roads. The pink roads, 15 to 20,000 cars a day above and beyond what it's currently carrying now. And then the orange roads, 10 to 15,000 additional cars a day above and beyond what's carrying now.
And
So
could you
there's
put that in layman's terms? I mean, what does 20,000 cars a day mean to, Randall Road or Route 47?
Yeah, I guess I would say we generally do additional lane widenings anytime you see a growth of around 15,000 cars. So you're looking at additional lane widenings that you need to do for the 15,000, 20,000 cars a day. And so I think that's maybe a way to describe it. Another way is that we're generally looking at ADTs to almost double on our roadway system. And
Tom, what would be like, say Randall Road and St. Charles, what would the total cars per day?
well, you're probably, and this is just a guess right now.
Guess.
You're probably looking at going from around 40,000 cars a day on Randall Road through that area to around 65,000 cars a day.
So bring your thermos.
Yeah, there was one of the slides showed the hours of delay, and I gave an example last time I spoke about it used to take me 25 minutes to get to work. Now it takes me 40 to 45 minutes to get to work. And so your amount of travel time it's going to increase, and the delays in traffic is going to increase.
So we can move on to the next one, but would it be possible, I don't know if these numbers exist, the cost of delay in transportation, in congestion versus economic development? Because if we're going to invest 822 million over a period of time, how is it going to benefit the county's economic development versus not doing it and having to deal with this overt congestion? I mean, are people going to avoid going shopping on Randall Road? Are they going to look at other places to live where it's less congested, better, hopefully air quality we won't have to worry about, but truck traffic, railroad traffic, we already know that that's being talked about as we speak. So what is the cost of doing nothing?
I will see what I can do in that regard. As far as job creation, that's another way you can look at some of the economic benefits. And generally, when you look at some of the national studies on it, you're looking at anywhere from around 12 to 20 some jobs created per $1 million of expenditure on a highway construction. So you're probably, for that $1 billion, you're probably, let's just say 15 jobs per $1 million. You're probably looking at about 15,000 jobs total that it's created because of the work that's needed, the workers that are needed to do it.
But that's just construction.
That's just construction. I will look and see if we can find anything in regards, because I'm sure there's numbers out there.
I'm positive there are. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, very good.
Thank you, Tom.
And the next one is going to be our buildings.
Guess I get to do this now, right? Let's move this. All right, good evening. Roger Fonstock, and I'm here to speak about the building management. So some of this we're going to try to go through a little bit faster than others so we can get to some of the numbers and projections. And I would start by just reminding everybody that the numbers and projections, some of these are based on studies that were done a few years ago that are being refreshed. We're doing assessments of the buildings for the deferred maintenance and their condition. So a lot of what we are looking at right now is kind of three modes of how things get maintained for our buildings. You probably have somewhere around 100 or around 1 million square feet of buildings in the county. We have 29, 30 buildings, depending on what you consider a building. But so those buildings are spread out all over the county. And they're in, varying degrees of age, varying degrees of repair and maintenance. So what you'll find is that there's kind of three cycles or three types. There's the preventative maintenance, which we would hope is something that's a part of taking care of any normal building There's the reactive maintenance, which are things that are not being done but have to be done, and you need to do it to react to a problem in a situation. And then you have this deferred maintenance, which are things that haven't been done over the years that probably should have been done. And there's a study, and we're going to talk about that for a minute. And then you have obviously the assessment of the current spaces and the use of the spaces. And then the master plan, which would give you guidance or a plan for the future of buildings and the utilization of space in the county. So we also have some numbers for that. Some of this we've already talked about in the previous session, where we're talking about all the different studies that are going on. I think in the last couple of weeks, and looking at building management, a lot of the inventory of the existing buildings and assessment of the buildings is becoming critical. We need to really get a handle on the actual assessment. I think that's more important, and a priority over even the master planning in the future. And we'll talk about that as well. Once we get beyond that, looking at the future utilization and space needs, I think that's gonna follow later. And I had talked before about kind of 3 different ways of looking at this: maintaining what you have, take care of what you own, take care of the buildings that exist, try to leverage them. We the last 2 years have really pushed a lot of technology into the buildings. We do a lot of things really different than how we used to do it 10, 20 years ago. And I think even the judiciary will tell you that last 2 years have been a game changer. They don't do things the way they used to, and they're reconsidering that right now. It's probably important to know. I think one of the biggest project plans that's going on right now, which is maybe not all of us are aware of, but the judiciary and all their partners are doing a master planning session. And they're talking about all these things, about how they use their facilities and their buildings, and how they use their people. I think that's an important part of it too. When you look at that and you think about it, and you think about the cost of the activities, operations, and services that go on at the Judicial Center campus, probably outside of maybe transportation and health, I mean, it is a large portion of the county's budget that goes into those operations. So how you do those are critical, and even more so critical, it's a big part of how you spend your money. So improving and expanding upon existing facilities, using them better, using better technology, better people and skills, organization of it. And the last piece is the building new facilities. When we have a kind of a cost benefit analysis, we understand what maintaining an existing building entails, what it costs to rehabilitate it or get it to fit a current use, versus replacing it or buying a new building and trying to get the operational needs met by new construction. I think those are kind of yet to be discovered. We're going to look at those through the master planning process, which is ongoing. So, maintaining existing facilities, we've talked about this. There's a lot of aspects that go into this, and these are probably the core features. This is what's going into the assessment and looking at the deferred maintenance, and how do you deal with the routine maintenance and service requests, and then all of the different elements that go into what I would consider to be a healthy and well-maintained building. We even have some other additional items that we've been talking about, is like the safety and security, accessibility, a lot of those things in buildings that are approaching 100 years old. Retrofitting it or trying to get it to where it's accessible versus starting with a new construction is quite challenging. This building even is approaching 100 years old. So common issues, we have all of them in these old buildings. I don't think we need to read through the list. We've gone through this before. I want to get to the numbers, but we do have significant amount of effort that goes into the deferred maintenance, reactionary types of maintenance. And I think right now, less of the time and money is spent on the preventative types of maintenance because of all the things that they have to react to. Going back to that type of maintenance mode operationally, one of the challenges that you have is it is people. It's not just capital reinvestment. I think that's been stressed over the last few years. I've been looking at some different ratios of staffing of maintenance to square footage. And I've seen numbers of anywhere from, one person to 20,000 square feet, one person to 80,000 square feet. The average is about 1 per 50,000 square feet. So one person to maintain a 50,000 square foot building for mechanical maintenance. And then you have contractors, obviously, that go with that. Right now, we're somewhere about half of that mark. So, we need to improve the operational maintenance that goes into our buildings, whether it's, and when we're getting into that, we're looking at the existing, staffing budget, which, I think staff budget for operational maintenance is 12 people right now. So if you use the 50,000 number that I was telling you, we're 8 people shy of being operationally at 50,000 square feet per maintenance technician. We have a lot of aging facilities, a lot of deferred maintenance. These are just, pictures of some of the conditional things that our maintenance workers see. You'll see, buildings that have numerous issues from, deteriorating concrete to, bathroom and plumbing issues to remediation of different things that have to happen. We have, a lot of different challenges. Storage and space is one of the chief ones that I deal with. A lot of people are looking for us to digitize or create like digital records to get rid of boxes of paper and file cabinets and try to recover space. I can show you a few places in the county where there's a lot of physical stuff as opposed to digital. We also have old structures that need removal, and we have a number of buildings that are scheduled and slated for demolition. We're working on a plan to try and get those started this year. We did finish the multipurpose building, which was a big relief to the Fabian campus, and we need to execute the plan to basically prepare that land for its next use. You can see some of the old structures, not so sightly, but they're there still. We need to work on getting those off the property so that we can prepare it for whatever next use it is. So the deferred maintenance in 2015, we had a study that was done on 27 buildings, and I would say we have 29 buildings now. The need was $18 million worth of deferred maintenance, and this is about a 640-page document. And it documented all of the varying degrees and gradation of all of your mechanical systems and various building systems. And they actually itemized $18 million worth of work. That wasn't an estimate. It was pretty much an itemization of what needed to be done. And looking at that number and looking at what the budget has been, that they spend an average of about $2 million a year on capital reinvestment in the buildings. And then we had the multipurpose building and a couple of other large capital projects, but those were really different projects, different budget areas from what we would do in capital replacement or life cycle replacement. And again, the assessment is being updated. We've been working with White and Company to do that part. The previous one, I think, was done in part with Cordigan and Clark, but they're going to do an update of that, and we'll have a similar projection. But as you spend $2 million a year to try and catch up on 18 million, there's new things that are going into deferred maintenance. So I'm going to project, just with my limited amount of knowledge, that it's probably not going to be better than the 18 million that we saw in 2015. That's just math and the types of deferred maintenance that we see. So we go back to improve and expand and build and trying to do some of the things that we talked about. I don't know that you can outrun the deferred maintenance. That's going to be there. You're going to have those things. This new assessment is going to come out, and it's going to tell you, what you have to deal with. I think, looking at the condition reports and trying to do the coordination with the offices and departments and the planning will be critical, because you have limited funds to do that. If you don't have some funding source to deal with $18 million worth of deferred maintenance and also doing preventative maintenance at the same time with, let's just estimate 20 maintenance technicians, which would be if you added another eight maintenance technicians at $100,000 with salary and benefits a year. And that might be challenging even if you can find good maintenance people at $60,000 to $70,000 plus benefits. So if you added eight maintenance technicians, it might cost $800,000 a year to add those people. I'm not saying that that's where we're at. We're still doing the assessments, but that's the kind of numbers that you'd be talking about. So in the absence of having capital to deal with deferred maintenance or the money to operationally deal with the recurring maintenance, you have a financial shortfall. You have to do a lot of short-term planning and looking at what the trade-offs are and what the priorities are. And that's something that we're trying to assess right now. We're collecting all the different projects and programs and things that they do, just trying to look at what they're spending their money on and what the priorities are. And I can tell you from my own experience in working with technology is that the priorities are where you get the high volume and the large dollars, because that's where you want to be the most efficient. And that leads to how you do your financial planning. So some of the, we talked about the 18 million and the deferred maintenance plan from 2015 that, we've made some progress, but I think we've also, lost some ground. These are some of the buildings that have been proposed over the years. And I used some construction estimates based on the buildings that were built in Will County and around the area to come up with some of these. But the government center campus here at 150,000 square feet, if you are using a construction price per square foot of $500, it's a $75 million campus to put somewhere else. And that's if you thought that this was not a good cost benefit investment to keep putting your money into this campus as opposed to being somewhere else like the Judicial Center campus or the other side of town. When we were doing the multi-purpose building, we talked about building a warehouse because of all the storage needs. And again, you'll find that the storage needs of the county compete with office space for our employees. So it's interesting. We actually will cordon off spaces for boxes while we double up desks and put people in, cubicle farms to have enough room for the boxes. And especially during COVID, there was not enough room for a lot of the supplies and the PPE and things coming into offices. People had to get really creative with how they store, boxes of sanitizer and cleaning products and masks. So we had proposed a 50,000 square foot warehouse and storage facility with the multi-purpose building, but that obviously was engineered out of the solution. Why 50,000 square feet? We were looking at what is used for the elections warehouse at the North Campus, and then also for the storage in various offices. And even with the new building that the sheriff has the large annex garage now, if you go out there, it's relatively full. And that's because they built it, kind of right size to, provide shelter for all the vehicles they have. So we still have a large demand for, warehouse storage. There's been talk on and off about our current health department building, which was acquired early in my career. I think it was at early 2005, somewhere around there. And it was retrofitted from an old professional building to become the health department. If some of you, I don't know if anybody here remembers when the health department was in the basement of the 6th Street School. It used to be in the basement of the old 6th Street School. And I remember when they moved there, that was a glorious thing. We got a newer building. And now if you look at it, I think there's a lot of issues that they would say it doesn't make it conducive to do a lot of services. A good example is when we had the mass vaccination site, all the PPE, the vaccines, all of the emergency power, we need generators, and the building just was not designed to do a lot of that. So, we ended up using the Sam's Club, and we've ended up improvising and using other spaces, trying to make things work. But if you were to build, 30,000 square feet of a health department building, again, you're $15 million investment at a new health department building. The Wright-Comm, Aurora, and Elgin offices, we have talked about having a 10,000 square foot, like kind of all service office space that could handle satellite office needs, everything from records to, we do probation service we do health, we do a lot of different services in those areas, or the people have to come here. There's already a elections office, health department, there's probation, there's state's attorney in Aurora. They're all in distributed offices. Some pay rent, some are there in a city facility. But there's been talk at times of having a satellite office in both Aurora and Elgin for the population centers of the county. Right now, a lot of what we do is those people have to come here to Geneva or St. Charles. So, 20,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet, office space, service counter, customer service in each location. You'd be dealing with, roughly $10 million to buy and build a new building. And you could certainly look at buying existing buildings and retrofitting those, but I think we've learned that some of the costs of retrofitting buildings can be almost worse than buying new. There's been talk over the years about the Judicial Center campus and the circuit clerk's office and the consolidation of the courts and the records on the same campus. Right now, the circuit clerk is sitting in just a little under 50,000 square feet. So if you wanted to move that and kind of create the entryway and vestibule part of that on the Judicial Center campus and consolidate them over there, you're probably looking at a relatively expensive, because you got to adjust the Judicial Center campus to accommodate it, but maybe 30 million. When they did the last master plan and they looked at the Judicial Center campus, this is just from memory, I recall them approaching 80 million to $100 million on that campus. And a lot of the conversation was, slowed down, and we're not sure we're going to be able to, pursue that. So that, depending on what the court's vision is for the future and what they think they need, it could, be significantly different. The other thing that's commonly mentioned out at the Judicial Center is a parking structure. We have a lot of surface parking right now at the Judicial Center, but as you put more services and more buildings out there, the contention for parking will come in, and instead of sprawling outward, we would go upward, and you'd need to build a parking structure. Last time they had the master planning, I think the parking structure was actually one of the kind of more higher priority to get the relief of the parking as opposed to building more buildings. And one of the trade-offs was we moved traffic court over to the North Campus on Randall Road, and we offloaded probably anywhere from 100 to 300 cars in the morning, people coming to traffic court. So it was a good plan. It actually was a big relief. But these are some of the buildings that we think would be prospects in a capital plan to do bonds for a building. And you're looking at, long-term 10, 20-year type of debt service. And we'd leave that up to Joe Onzik to probably tell us what that looks like. Oops, hit the right button. So again, going back to deferred maintenance, there's, $18 million, probably more in deferred maintenance that's out there. And again, we spend an average of about $2 million a year on capital, reinvestment. So if you're looking at long-term 10 years, you're spending $20 million right now every 10 years, and you're 18 to $20 million behind. So in the next 10 years, you could probably spend $40 million and be relatively caught up, which it's just the way things are stacked up with the deferred maintenance and aging buildings. That's the position you find yourself in. The new facilities, I think when you do the master facility plan and you look at the utilization and all the program needs and office and space needs, any of those buildings would probably be a welcome addition to any of those offices and departments. I can tell you our office, just IT, is sitting in a 70-year-old gymnasium that was retrofitted into office space. That's what we work with. I can tell you that I have more bathrooms in my house than that building has. So that's just the way it is, and we've adapted and used it. It is what it is. Those are the two main categories that we were talking about, though, the 18 and deferred maintenance, and then obviously the up to 150 million in buildings that I could see in the foreseeable future. If you're looking at 10 years to 20 years out, those are kind of the vision. Another one that didn't make our list, which I think we actually had a study that recommended it at one time, was a consolidated dispatch center. And it was almost $35 million for an actual dispatch center to support 911 and emergency management. And it was a discussion about whether or not we would want to, even entertain talking about that with the board and the cities. And I think that at the time it didn't have enough, traction to get people to want to have that discussion. But that's something that's out there as well. How do you handle public safety and 911 in the future? We operate out of building C over here, and it is bursting at the seams. They make do like everybody else. And if you look at some of the other facilities like Tricom and Quadcom, a lot of them have had discussions, about what are they going to do in the future? What's the future of this? So it's not anything that's been planned out or even discussed much, but I could see that in 10 to 20 years. So that, I think I'm done speaking and answer any questions.
Question and factoid, Shepro?
Sure.
I
Mr.
believe
Foss,
that,
Shepro.
I
Mr.
believe
Shepro,
that.
Mr. Shepro, please,
Yes.
Mr. Foss is first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm not a question, just a comment. It's no secret. I've been a proponent of fulfilling the 1990s era plan of building out, the majority of the county facilities out at the Peck and 38 campus. And, if you look at that one sheet that had all the different buildings on it, if you add them all up, it's $150 million. Now, assuming there'd be some economies of scale and at least $10 to $15 million in sale of surplus properties and things like that. I mean, I think for $125 million, you could move all the facilities out there that we need to. And even the dispatch center, if you're building a new county board building, adding, 30,000 square feet isn't that expensive when you're doing it all at once. So, just like somebody buying a house for 300,000, it seems like a lot of money, but if you finance it over 30 years, it's not too bad. But, we could bond this for, 20 to 30 years and take care of all our needs. And you'd also be deducting all of that deferred maintenance and things that we're paying now. So, and that's not to mention energy efficiencies and reduced maintenance because of low maintenance, newer materials and things like that. So, I think the admin committee should look at least talking to bond counsel to just talk about what our options might be. Because when we brought up the subject to bond counsel, and our bonding company advisor, I guess would be the right word. When we talked to them about the multi-use building, it seemed like a big thing, and they just kind of said, "You can easily afford this," So I think it's something we should look at, and I think the board back in the 90s when they purchased that property out there with the plan to do that, first of all, I think they'd be astounded that here we are in 2022 and it hasn't been fulfilled, but I think it was a sound plan and it's still a workable plan. And we are updating, as Roger said, we're updating the master plan that would include adjusting that older site plan that's not very specific to include some of these buildings. So looking forward to seeing that. And I guess that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Mr. Shepro, your turn.
Well, one, I would echo Mr. Franz's comments. A couple of historical notes. Jeez. Sorry, the phone won't stop ringing. We have the oldest core facilities, meaning 3rd Street and the building you are all in at the moment, of any of the 6 metropolitan counties by far. Everybody else has a newer structure, newer facilities. And I think this presentation kind of highlights where that has left us. Drew is right. I mean, there was considerable effort put into that campus study. And I think that was part of the reason why it was acquired in the first place. And yet we have somehow avoided going anywhere near fulfilling that plan. I seem to recall that the idea for the Joint Dispatch Center foundered on a too large number of individual dispatch jurisdictions that couldn't agree on what they wanted to do. And I also think there was some question about security and having all of those things in one location that would be on the government campus. Anyway, otherwise, I agree. We've had plans and plans and more plans, and yet we still are stuck with some of the oldest and in maintenance intensive buildings of any of our neighboring counties.
So, one of the things that I would say is regarding the 911 center, they did an Emergency Telephone Systems Act change. It was about probably 5-6 years ago. And during that, they required that the Emergency Telephone Systems Board only have 2 911 centers within each ETSB. So in our area, South Elgin had already consolidated out of business, Montgomery consolidated out of business, and it left Aurora, CaneCom, and Tricom in our ETSB. And we got a waiver while we waited for an exception to allow Aurora just to move to Naperville instead of trying to consolidate one of them out of business. And we're telling them that, we believe that we have 3 really large, significant 911 centers. We are not a small police department dispatch center consolidating out of business. We had 3 agencies that were doing, well over 70,000 population each. So consolidating one into the other was a very difficult proposition. We did get the waiver. In that time, we were talking about, well, if we get down to 2 within one ETSB, what's to stop the next step from being you can only have 2 in an entire county or 1? And there are some states that have done that where they say, for the sake of consolidation, standardization, interoperability, they don't want to have all these dispatch centers. They want to consolidate down to 1 or 2 per county or within, a certain metropolitan area. So we were looking at that as, eventually if you had to consolidate out of business, Aurora and Elgin are the large kind of metropolitan areas that are really well established. So if, would those be the 2, or would, you have this kind of county entity, or how would that work? So we did a study to kind of look at that. And that's where, the consolidated study came from. And it did, there's a lot of tension about, how would the board look like for a consolidated dispatch center? Who has, the control over the center and the facility and operating? And it was a lot to look at. We were just looking at the cost of the building, and then you get into the operational part of it, which is staff and collective bargaining and municipal versus other interests. So it's a complicated question. That one's more complicated than any of these, I will tell you that.
Madam Chair, Bates, please.
Hold on, Ms. Bates, you will be next. Michelle Gomes has a question.
I just wanted to comment on the consolidation issue. Working in the 911 arena for 20 years, and it is an incredibly complex topic to consolidate those. It's got so multi-pronged. You're working with seniority issues, employee staffing issues. You're working with people that are responsible for returning, our first responders home each day and having a personal relationship with them. There's a lot that goes into that discussion, and it's not as easy as one might think. So, if we ever get to that point, certainly I hope it's a deeper conversation than just consolidating bodies.
Yeah. And I would like to just remind the board that right now we really need just to discuss on the buildings, not personnel, and not how we're going to consolidate. So I think Ms. Bates, and then last question, Ms. Wernicke. Ms. Bates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do understand that this building plan was very in-depth and very comprehensive, and I'm sure it was a wonderful plan. I want to say that old is beautiful in many eyes. Our old buildings are preserving our history and our character, our community character. The maintenance numbers have never been proven to me about old buildings over new buildings. Even our new judicial center is needing some big maintenance expenses. So this has never been proven to me. I want to make sure that we're not trying to give up on our old buildings. I think they preserve the character of our community. I like them. Thank you. That's it.
All right, I think we're all in agreement with the old buildings are lovely. Ms. Winnicki?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when I look at the three presentations, I think they're all equally as important. There's no question. But in my mind, mental health is more of a program, and transportation and county buildings is more of a project. So I kind of feel like there's, maybe programs here, projects here, kind of a 50-50 split. If we look at programs, if this referendum does pass or we move forward with it, and there's a sunset date, what happens to the programs? Because now we've have all this new employees in these programs, and the mental health, we maybe enlarge our area for mental health, but if we have a sunset date, what happens then when we really can't afford to keep all the new employees and all the new space that we've taken up? So in a way, I'd almost like to see the money, if this referendum question, if we vote to move it forward and let's say it passes, I'd almost like to see almost a 50-50 split for more for programs, for mental health, public health, and then maybe one for buildings,
Two referendums, but only one annually that can be at every election. And to answer your question, we can put a sunset clause on this. We don't have to. So that, for instance, let's say we want to fund mental health, for example, we could ask for a 25 cent on a $100 purchase, and that can go on in perpetuity. Would never sunset. For buildings, we can say, I'm looking at the math, do an equation. Let's say we would have it sunset in 15 years. Or transportation, very similar to that. Although I think transportation needs are going to be ongoing in a consistent manner. But the construction may be finite. So we would, if you wanted to go with buildings, we would take a look at what that potential sunset may be. And then it would stop at that point. But if it's a program.
I think our residents of Kane County would be, if we were to move forward with this, would be a lot more comfortable knowing there's a sunset date.
That's, I think, yet to be determined. But I think your point is very well said.
Thank you.
Well taken. Mr. Martin?
Thank you. I wanted to join with Drew and the other people that have talked about replacing our antiquated facilities. I mean, I understand old and I understand beauty, but it's when you walk into another government's offices and they actually function, when you don't have to sit and have conversations about the fact that you conduct your board meeting in a church auditorium that has too many windows in it for audio visual to work, and when you go to see your finance director and use the restroom next to his office and see that it's got a bathtub with a piece of plywood over the top, and when you walk down staircases that would be an absolute hazard if there was a fire, because they're only wide enough for one person to go down. And as importantly, when the whole world is properly worried about security, just when you leave the building tonight, count how many ground level windows there are in that building and how many doors there are, and then suggest that you're going to provide any security. The building, as it exists, doesn't function. It was a men's dormitory with a few classrooms in it, and it to spend money retrofitting a building because it looks nice on the outside, in my opinion, is not good stewardship of county funds. We're supposed to be conducting the public's business in the most efficient way we can. And if I want to buy a 100-year-old house and enjoy the fact that I have to spend all this money, but I love the beauty of it, that's my call. But when we're spending taxpayers' money, I think we need to apply a different standard of analysis to that question. And I, the topic has kind of fallen off the radar screen, but I am really believing that in the context of our capital improvements and what we do with our buildings, we need to unload real estate that has no clear purpose to the county. I think of the Fabian Parkway property, which ought to be sold. The Forest Preserve can't use it. We have no focus on ever having used it, and the discussion sits there. And I don't want to turn this into more of a rant than it is, but when Roger's presentation had so much stuff in it relating to retrofitting and deferred maintenance and all this other stuff, that how much of that disappears if we do what Drew mentioned and just build a new building and bat it out for 20 years or whatever we can do, and have something that functions.
Bates, please.
Hold,
Madam Chair.
we've, Ms. Bates, you've already had a chance to speak. I know we
I need a little
realize.
rebuttal. $75 million is a lot of money. Don't forget that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Ford,
Thank you.
it seems like you've got everybody's ire up right now.
Okay.
No, I
Just started.
I do understand that trying to maintain our existing buildings and the beauty of them. But all our presentations was great. We had to strongly look at mental health and see it affects life so much these days and see how we can really make that work. The transportation is definitely going to be important because we can't develop economic development county that we're talking about without improving our infrastructures. When it comes to our county buildings, I think Drew hit it pretty clear about looking at bonds. Most buildings are built with bonds, and bonds for municipal usually go pretty well. We actually remodeled our church on bonds, and I've been through that process with working for the city of Aurora on different things. The yearly maintenance I can see changing, increasing. Right now we got boilers in a lot of places. You can replace and put a brand new boiler, but you just don't have access to replace all the pipes. And one day those pipes gonna go bad. We can go ahead and improve all the bathrooms, but you can't get access to all the plumbing in the wall to replace it. So you're adding good towards bad. And then as far as handicap accessibility, I like to know is there's at least one building that we have that really meets our handicap accessibility. And from what I've seen, it doesn't exist. To take some of the properties and turn them back over into a tax books, I think we have to take a look at that value. I know that takes a while, but still that value comes along as we're paying for whatever we're paying for. The other thing is security is going to be more and more of an important thing. And when we have to take a look at that. I mean, right now we pay for a sheriff to be downstairs, and that's good that he's down there when people come in. But there's 5 other accesses that are not well secured. So we need to at least take a good look at that. So I mean, I love these buildings. Don't get me wrong. I love them. I love historical buildings, but you can't keep patching over and over again. It's sooner or later, it just catches up with you. So we're not really doing a strong maintenance. We're just doing a minimum amount of repair to keep going. And sooner or later, that really catches up with you.
All right. Are there any? Yes, Mr. Berman.
Well, I just want to bring us back to reality. we just went through a period this year of really having difficulty coming up and balancing our budget. And now we're talking about instituting a tax of some nature that is going to promote new programs. So let's not forget our requirements and our needs for our budgeting process for the things that we have going on now. So I think we want to keep that in our minds.
Agreed, agreed. And that as we factor into those decisions, I will bring Mr. Onsick in at our next meeting and he can present those reports. But before we let Mr. Fonstock off of the podium, we have requested reports from the other two, and I'm going to keep you for about another 5 minutes. So we're going to be out here at 5:30. Would you like any additional information from him, from this committee, to send to the board? Yes, Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If possible, and I know this could be a real project, but I'd like to find out what our utility and maintenance costs are right now for existing campus and what might be reduced or saved if we did a building project of any size.
Okay. I think one of the advantages you have is that we're actually doing the energy pricing with a broker for natural gas right now. And I believe Energy and Environment is doing an assessment. They're looking at all the utility for ComEd to look at availability of programs and funding for efficiency opportunities. So I think we may have those in the works. It might take a little bit to get it back.
That'd be fine. And it's the type of thing that, once again, if we could get a summary, I know the other people on the board are brighter than I, but I need it very simple and like on one page. So if that would be possible, that would be great.
Okay, and
Can work on that.
we're going to need that before the 22nd of May. So even if it's based on a previous year or a couple years back, that'll suffice.
We would look at actual costs, actual expenditures by.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Shepro?
I think it might be helpful if we used the numbers that Drew and Roger were talking about and projected what the annual cost of a 20-year bond issue would be for the build out.
It's pretty, yeah.
All right, and that can go in the one pager.
Yeah.
Fred speaking, like when we did the multi-use building, we sat down with our bond advisor and, I know he worked with John Hoscheid and they came up with some really creative ideas. So I think it's just a short conversation. So, and
I know I don't want to spend money recklessly because I'm a very thrifty spender by nature, but I think we need to ask for what we need, big picture. We can always come down, but if we don't ask for what we really think that we need to satisfy long-term, we're going to be short-sighted. And in 10 years, we're going to say, I should have put in that extra bathroom. So thank you, Roger.
Yes.
So now deadlines. We know we have the authority to be able to do this, but we have to provide the question two ways. We can do a non-binding referendum for the June 28th ballot. And that's going to have to be submitted if you want to go in that direction by April 11th. So it's going to be very quick. If you decide that you want to narrow it down to 2 and send it out to the public and ask them if they would be interested in supporting A or B or none. Because then you know that they don't want either one of those. The next one, if you choose not to do that, we have to submit the choice of the board to the November 8th election by August 15th. So those are the critical deadlines that we have to, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on. Either way, we have to submit whatever the resolution is going to be, regardless of the non-binding resolution, by August 15th, if you choose to do this. So that's why we're going to have the next meeting.
What did you say the April date was?
The April date is April 11th, and we'll double check my math, but it's within a couple of days of that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Yeah. Mr.
I
Brown.
know judicial and public safety is doing their own planning right now, but wasn't that going to be one of the
That's going to be
buckets that we
tomorrow.
were going to consider?
Thank you for reminding me. That'll be tomorrow. They've asked to do it during judicial public safety meeting. So that was fine. That's why I scheduled this one today, so that tomorrow they'll do their presentation. So you still will have 4 to be able to take a look at. And then we'll
Shepro, question?
Yes, Mr.
Comment?
Shepro. Yes.
I thank you, Commissioner Berman, for reminding us what we really are about. And for the one-page summary, or maybe for everybody's one-page summary, I think I would like to see everybody tell us what of their presentation is a new ask and a new program, and what is designed to remedy, an existing problem or fill an existing gap. Because I think that's going to be important when we decide what we want to do. It's wonderful to have all these programs, but I sort of thought that the original premise of looking at our budget gap and all of these wonderful and maybe necessary ideas, as Mr. Berman points out, are new ideas and new programs. And we still have the problem with the where we started, which is the budget. So I think it would be helpful for all of us to be able to see estimate of those numbers.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. When we talked build out at the end of this meeting, are we talking about the Judicial Center build out? Is that?
Mr. Fonstock, we have a question.
Yeah.
Real quick, could you repeat it?
I know at the end of this meeting, right before you spoke, Madam Chair, as somebody said, we're going to focus on the build out. And so what is the build out? Is that the Judicial Center campus? Is that what we're talking about?
I think, the master plan would kind of dictate what the construction would look like. Whether it's that particular campus, which has been kind of I think the idea for better part of maybe 2 or 3 decades. And then, what services and things do you put on there? There are quite a bit of synergy on that campus already with the courts, judicial, juvenile, the jail, and then, what about the rest of the government services? Would they go there? There's property south of 38, north of 38. There's an opportunity to really have a pretty, sizable campus of everything there. There are some people that are looking at like the distribution of things, services to Elgin, Aurora, so like satellite offices. Even in the court master plan, they're talking about not necessarily how do you consolidate everything in one place, but how do you get the service to the right places where people are able to get access to it and do it within a region, without driving too far.
So this will be discussed tomorrow at Judiciary, pretty much.
I don't know what they're going to be presenting. We'll see.
I don't think they're talking about their master plan at that point. I think it's about safety, the Safety Act.
Oh, okay.
And the
Services.
demands that puts on them.
Correct. So I appreciate the budget question because I'm definitely concerned about that and supportive. But this is going to be very specifically funded. If the taxpayers pass this, they will know if we move forward with mental health, a 7-person board by law will be put together, and they will distribute $13 million to mental health. If it's a capital investment, we know for a fact $13 or $26 million annually will go into our buildings. That would relieve our budget for building maintenance, but it'll go to buildings. The same thing with roads and transportation. We know for a fact that you will have then maybe $26 million annually, give or take, that'll go into improving roads and bike paths, et cetera. So the money is specifically geared towards that. Would it relieve the general fund? so that perhaps some of the money from the general fund would not necessarily have to go into those specific programs that otherwise we would have to fund through the general fund? Yes. What that looks like as far as numbers go, that's yet to be determined. So it is going to be relieving the budget, but there will be additional funds coming through for that. Yes.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Rathbun.
you said we would have to have the wording for a non-binding referendum by April 11th.
Correct.
To be on the June 28th primary. And August 18th, what is the rest of that statement?
sure.
Could you repeat that for me, please?
August 15th?
15th, okay. And that is not non-binding if we put
That
it
is,
on the,
that's binding.
it is binding at the time of the election.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
And we are not allowed to do a survey by the state's attorney.
Not allowed to do a survey?
Or a polling. We're not allowed to do it. No, no, sir.
Well, I respectfully disagree with that, but never mind.
But we can do a non-binding referendum.
Madam Chair, I'd like to take the end dates and work backwards. So if there's going to be the idea of doing a non-binding referendum, that would mean the board has to make a decision by a certain date. The language has to be drafted, the state's attorney has to look at it, and it has to get to the clerk's office in order to get it on the ballot. So have we put those dates together yet?
That's why the April 11th, we have to give the clerk's office that information. And the referendum itself is pretty simple to put in. We have experts who can do that. It's pretty formulaic, in my opinion. So I don't think that that's going to be the challenge, but being able to make the decision on this board is going to be the brunt of this.
So the decision would have to be made in that board meeting, the 1st of April.
Correct. Feet are going to be held to the fire. So that's, I think we need to thank everyone who helped put this together. Thank you, the three of you. I know that has been a lot of work, very useful information for us. And we will be using your reports again as we start taking a look at the budget for next year. Because as we start seeing what your needs are, those needs have to be considered as we're looking at our budget analysis.
Can we put a big billboard out front that says we've frozen the tax levy for 11 years?
There'll be an educational program that will be presented. There'll be several town halls, which we can't have.
Plans never say that.
All right, thank you all. May I have a motion and a second to convene the meeting?
I move we adjourn.
Okay, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a good night.